Biblical scholars have argued for years about the location of these holy sites. Now, one man says he might have found them. For decades, one mountain sat hidden in plain sight, sealed behind barbed wire, guarded by silence, and quietly removed from global attention. Officially, it was nothing, just another restricted zone in the deserts of Saudi Arabia. But unofficially, whispers never stopped. Stories of ancient fire marks, split rocks, and a forgotten history buried beneath the surface. Now, everything is changing. We're standing just miles from Jabal al-Lawz, a site many believe could be the real Mount Sinai, not the one shown in textbooks, not the one millions have been told about. This one, hidden in the ancient land of Midian, a nearby graveyard, currently under excavation, possibly holding the remains of thousands linked to one of the most controversial moments in biblical history. Then came 2025, a breakthrough no one expected. Scientists deployed 3D AI-powered drones, technology designed to see beneath solid rock. What they uncovered wasn't natural. It couldn't be. Perfect geometric chambers, underground structures, patterns too precise, too intentional to be dismissed as coincidence. If this is real, it doesn't just challenge history. It rewrites it. Before we expose what they found beneath the mountain, hit like and subscribe, because some truths were never meant to be seen. The wrong mountain. Let me tell you about the greatest misdirection in religious history. For over 1,500 years, millions of pilgrims have traveled to a mountain in Egypt called Jabal Musa. There is a famous monastery at its base, St. Catherine's, built in the 6th century by the Byzantine Emperor Justinian. Tourists climb those ancient steps every single day, believing they are walking where Moses walked. Churches teach it. Textbooks confirm it. The location has become so established that questioning it feels almost heretical. But here's the problem that nobody wants to talk about. The evidence does not match, not even close. The Bible describes Mount Sinai as a place of fire and smoke. The burning bush from the Bible, where God speaks to Moses, is one such example. When God descended upon it, the mountain burned. The ground shook violently. Smoke rose like the smoke of a furnace. The entire peak was engulfed in what can only be described as a volcanic fury. Now, look at Jabal Musa. It is granite, solid, stable, and geologically dead. Granite. Geologists have surveyed every inch of it. There is no evidence of volcanic activity, no scorched rock, no thermal damage, nothing that could explain the cataclysmic events described in Exodus. Then there is the geography problem. According to the biblical account, the Israelites crossed the Red Sea and traveled through a region called Midian before reaching the mountain of God. Here's the thing about Midian that scholars have known for centuries, but conveniently ignored. Midian was not in Egypt. It was east of the Gulf of Aqaba. It was in what is now northwestern Saudi Arabia. The destination the Israelites were headed to is located in Midian, which is modern-day Arabia, modern-day Saudi Arabia. So, Midian was in Saudi Arabia, not in the Sinai Peninsula. The route described in Exodus leads directly away from the Sinai Peninsula and toward the Arabian Desert. So, how did we end up at the wrong mountain for 1,500 years? The answer is politics, power, and one very influential monastery. In the 4th century, Christianity had just become legal in the Roman Empire. Pilgrimage became an obsession. Believers wanted to see the places mentioned in Scripture with their own eyes. They wanted proof, and the church needed to provide it. So, when a small group of monks settled beneath a mountain in Egypt and claimed it was Sinai, nobody questioned them. Emperor Justinian built a fortress, monastery to make it official. The site accumulated wealth, influence, and political protection. Challenging it meant challenging 15 centuries of tradition, millions of devoted pilgrims, and one of the oldest Christian institutions on earth. Scholars built their theories around the assumption that Jabal Musa was correct. They rewrote geography. They dismissed contradictions. They refused to look anywhere else until a drone flew over Saudi Arabia and found what should have been there all along. The forbidden scan. In the northwestern corner of Saudi Arabia, there is a mountain called Jabal al-Lawz. For decades, a small group of researchers argued this was the real Mount Sinai. The location fit the biblical route. The geography matched. Local Bedouin tribes had called it the Mountain of Moses for generations, but nobody could prove it because Saudi Arabia would not let anyone look. The region was classified as restricted. Military installations dotted the landscape. Armed patrols guarded the approaches. Archaeologists who applied for permits were denied. Film crews were turned away at checkpoints. The only evidence that leaked out came from adventurers who snuck in illegally and smuggled out grainy photographs before being arrested or expelled. The mystery of Jabal al-Lawz stayed, locked behind barbed wire and bureaucratic stone walls. Then, the technology changed everything. In 2025, a private research team made a deal with Saudi officials. No boots on the ground, no excavation. Just one drone carrying equipment that military organizations used to find: underground bunkers and buried weapons. Caches. This was a phased array, ground-penetrating radar system. Technology so powerful it can map structures hidden beneath 100 feet of solid rock and create three-dimensional images of what lies underneath. The team programmed a flight path over Jabal al-Lawz, launched the drone, and waited for the data to come back. What appeared on their screens made the entire lab go silent. The radar detected structures, not natural caves, not geological fissures, but man-made structures, rectangular chambers arranged in grid patterns beneath the surface, walls meeting at perfect 90-degree angles, corridors connecting rooms in layouts that looked planned, deliberate, and architectural. You do not find right angles in nature. Erosion creates curves, tectonic shifts create chaos. But the scans showed order, the kind of order that only comes from human construction or something beyond human. Explanation. The depth readings place these chambers roughly 40 feet below the current surface, buried by millennia of landslides, erosion, and the slow accumulation of desert sand, sealed intact and waiting to be found. But the real shock was the scale. This was not a small shelter or a single room. The radar detected a network of chambers spanning over 300 feet. If you laid this complex out on the surface, you would be looking at something the size of a football field, large enough to hold thousands of people, large enough to match the biblical description of 600,000 men, plus women and children, gathered at the base of the mountain of God. The team ran the scans 3 times. They checked for interference. They recalibrated every sensor. The data held. Something massive is buried under that mountain, and it has been there since the time of Moses. The evidence carved in stone. The underground chambers were just the beginning. Once the radar data went public, researchers started examining older reports from people who had managed to visit Jabal al-Lawz before the restrictions. What they had documented matches the biblical account with disturbing precision. Start at the summit. The rock at the peak of Jabal al-Lawz is black, not weathered black, not stained by lichen or mineral deposits, but scorched black, as if the stone itself had been subjected to intense heat. Every other mountain in the surrounding range is light-colored granite, tan and gray, normal desert rock. But this one peak looks like it was dropped into a furnace. Geologists who analyzed samples found evidence of thermal metamorphism. The rock had been altered by temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius. That is hotter than flowing lava. It is the kind of heat you get from a catastrophic fire or an explosive event of unimaginable scale. Exodus chapter 19 describes exactly this. The mountain burned. Smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace. The whole mountain quaked greatly. The blackened summit of Jabal al-Lawz fits that description perfectly. Now, move to the base. There, explorers found a massive boulder split cleanly down the middle. The crack is smooth, almost surgical. The two halves sit separated by a wide channel. The ground around it shows heavy erosion patterns, water erosion, in one of the driest regions on Earth. The Bible describes Moses striking a rock and water pouring out in quantity sufficient to satisfy millions of people and all their livestock. The split boulder at Jabal al-Lawz matches that story. There is no water source nearby today. The erosion suggests a massive sudden flow, something that happened once, dramatically, and then stopped. Near the base of the mountain, researchers discovered a large stone platform. It is not a natural formation. The stones are cut and deliberately stacked. The dimensions matched descriptions of altars used in ancient Israelite worship. Around the platform, they found burnt animal bones. Chemical analysis dated some of them to the late Bronze Age, the exact period when the Exodus would have occurred. Exodus 24 describes Moses building an altar at the base of the mountain and offering sacrifices. The stone platform at Jabal al-Lawz sits in the right place, from the right time, with evidence of exactly the right activity. But perhaps the most controversial discovery was the petroglyphs. Carved into rocks near the site are images of cattle, bulls with curved horns. In several carvings, the images show people bowing before these animals. This matches the story of the golden calf. While Moses was on the mountain receiving the commandments, the Israelites grew impatient. They melted their gold jewelry and fashioned an idol to worship. Moses descended, saw what they had done, and destroyed it. But the memory remained. The rock art at Jabal al-Lawz suggests that memory was carved into stone by people who were there. Then, there are the boundary markers. Exodus 19 warns the people not to touch the mountain or they would die. Moses established boundaries to keep them back. At Jabal al-Lawz, long lines of stones encircle the base of the peak. They are not walls. They are not animal pens. They are single-file rows of stones marking a perimeter, a line not to be crossed. Every piece of surface evidence points to this location. The scorched summit, the split rock, the altar with burnt offerings, the boundary stones, the golden calf petroglyphs, all of it aligns with the biblical narrative. And now, the radar has revealed what lies beneath: the silence of the skeptics. There is an argument that skeptics have used for decades to dismiss the Exodus story. Where is the evidence? If millions of people camped at Mount Sinai for nearly a year, where are the artifacts? Where is the pottery, the tools, the fire pits, the waste dumps? The absence of material evidence, they claim, proves the Exodus never happened. But archaeologists who specialize in nomadic cultures tell a very different story. The Israelites were not building cities. They lived in tents. Tents do not leave foundations. They leave small post holes that erode within decades. The Israelites ate manna and unleavened bread. They were not firing pottery on a massive scale. The few clay vessels they carried would have broken and scattered across miles of desert. Over 3,000 years, those fragments would mix with pottery from countless other nomadic groups passing through the same corridors, becoming impossible to isolate and identify. Fire pits decay, ash blows away in the wind, stones scatter. After 3 millennia, even soil discoloration fades into nothing. In a desert environment, organic material vanishes completely. Human waste, food scraps, fabric, leather, all of it breaks down and disappears. The expectation that we should find clear surface evidence of a temporary camp from 3,000 years ago is scientifically unrealistic. But here is what the radar changes. The evidence is not missing. It is buried. The chambers detected beneath Jabal al-Lawz could be storage facilities. They could be shelters that were later covered by landslides and flash floods. The Arabian desert is violent. A single storm can bury structures in a generation. If the Israelites built anything permanent at the base of that mountain, if they carved storage rooms into the rock or reinforced natural caves, those spaces would be underground by now, hidden, sealed, and preserved by the dry desert air. The radar shows rectangular rooms arranged in grids. That is not geology. That is architecture. That is deliberate construction by human hands. And the depth of 40 feet suggests these structures have been buried for thousands of years, waiting for technology advanced enough to find them. Skeptics also point to Egyptian records. If the Exodus happened, why did Egypt never write about it? This argument sounds compelling until you understand how Egyptian documentation worked. Pharaohs recorded victories. They celebrated conquests. They did not document humiliating defeats. If a pharaoh lost his labor force, watched his country destroyed by plagues, and saw his army drowned in the sea, he would never immortalize that failure in stone. We have direct evidence that Egyptian rulers erased embarrassing history. When the Hyksos rulers were expelled, their names were physically scratched from monuments. When Akhenaten tried to reform Egyptian religion, later pharaohs destroyed his statues and removed his name from temple walls. If Egypt was willing to erase its own kings, it would absolutely erase a story about a foreign god defeating them. The silence in Egyptian records is not evidence against the Exodus. It is exactly what we would expect if the Exodus actually happened. What lies in the vault? Now, we enter territory that some will call speculation and others will call prophecy, because there are researchers who believe those buried chambers might contain something more significant than pottery and tools. They believe the Ark of the Covenant could be sealed beneath that mountain. Follow the logic. The Ark was built at Mount Sinai. Exodus 25 describes the construction in precise detail, a chest of acacia wood overlaid with pure gold. Inside it, the stone tablets bearing the 10 Commandments. The ark traveled with the Israelites for centuries. It was housed in the tabernacle, then placed in Solomon's temple in Jerusalem, and then it vanished. By the time the Babylonians destroyed the temple in 586 BC, the ark was already gone. No record of its capture, no mention of its destruction. It simply disappeared from history. For 2,000 years, people have searched for it. Theories place it in Ethiopia, hidden in a church. In Egypt, buried in a secret tomb. In Israel, sealed beneath the Temple Mount. But what if it never left the place where it was created? Consider the scenario. The kingdom of Israel was collapsing. The temple was under threat. The priests needed to protect the most sacred object in their religion, the physical representation of God's presence among his people. Where would they take it? Not to Egypt. Egypt was the ancient enemy. Not to a city that would fall to invaders. They would take it to the one place no enemy would dare to defile, the mountain of God. Mount Sinai was sacred ground. It was remote. It was protected by hundreds of miles of wilderness. If the priests sealed the ark in a hidden chamber beneath that mountain, it would be safe. It would remain hidden until the right moment. The radar detected sealed rectangular chambers cut into the rock. If those chambers were designed to protect something valuable, the ark is not impossible. A remote possibility, a controversial possibility, but a possibility that cannot be dismissed. Even without the ark, the implications are staggering. Someone invested enormous time, labor, and resources to construct underground rooms at the base of a scorched mountain in the middle of the Arabian desert. The only explanation that fits all the evidence is the one written in Exodus thousands of years ago. This is the mountain where Moses received the law. This is where fire descended from heaven. This is where the covenant between God and humanity was sealed. The sacred memory here is something most people miss completely, and it changes everything about how we understand this discovery. The Bible suggests that Mount Sinai was already holy before Moses ever set foot on it. Think about that for a moment. In Exodus 3, when Moses first encounters the burning bush, God tells him to remove his sandals because the ground beneath his feet is holy. Not that it will become holy after this encounter. Not that God is making it holy in that moment. The ground already is holy. The sanctity predates the arrival of Moses. This single detail carries enormous implications. Moses did not stumble upon some random unknown peak in the wilderness. He was drawn to a place that already carried spiritual significance, a mountain that was already recognized as sacred ground. But sacred to whom? This is where the Midianites enter the story. Remember that Moses had been living among the Midianites for 40 years before the burning bush incident. He had married a Midianite woman named Zipporah. Her father, Jethro, was a Midianite priest. Moses had spent 4 decades immersed in Midianite culture, tending sheep in their territory, learning their ways, and almost certainly absorbing their religious traditions. If the Midianites considered a particular mountain to be holy, Moses would have known about it. He would have understood its significance. And when God called him to that mountain, he would have recognized exactly where he was being summoned. Archaeological surveys of the region around Jabal al-Lawz powerfully support this interpretation. Researchers have discovered extensive Midianite settlements in the surrounding valleys. They have uncovered distinctive Midianite pottery decorated with geometric patterns that date to the late Bronze Age. They have found copper smelting sites where the Midianites processed ore from nearby mines. They have mapped evidence of organized trade networks connecting this region to Egypt, to the Levant, and to the broader ancient world. The Midianites were not primitive nomads wandering aimlessly through the desert. They were a sophisticated people with established territories, religious practices, and cultural traditions stretching back generations. They knew every peak in their landscape. They would have assigned meaning to the unusual ones. And Jabal al-Lawz is deeply unusual. A blackened summit rising above tan and gray neighbors would have demanded explanation. A split boulder showing evidence of water in a waterless region would have inspired stories. The Midianites would have developed traditions around these features long before any Israelite arrived. The mountain carried sacred memory before Moses, and that memory created a continuous thread linking the past to the present. This continuity of sacred memory is critically important for understanding why the real location was preserved while the false one was invented. The people who lived near Jabal al-Lawz in Arabia never forgot. Generation after generation. Fathers told sons, mothers told daughters, elders told children. The mountain of Moses, the place where fire descended, the ground where God spoke. This was not abstract theology to them. It was local geography. It was part of their lived landscape. They walked past it. They pointed to it. They kept the memory alive through thousands of years of unbroken oral tradition. Meanwhile, 1,500 miles away in Egypt, Byzantine monks were guessing. They had no connection to the original tradition. They had no access to the living memory. They had texts and legends and political motivations, but they did not have the continuous thread that linked them to the actual events. When they pointed at Jabal Musa and declared it Mount Sinai, they were constructing a tradition from scratch. They were inventing a sacred site because they needed one to exist, not because they knew where the real one was. The monks were outsiders assigning meaning to a land they never truly understood. The Bedouin tribes near Jabal al-Lawz were the insiders, guardians of a legacy carried through countless generations. For centuries, Western academics brushed aside those Bedouin accounts. They labeled them as folklore, dismissed them as superstition, and reduced them to the hopeful imagination of desert dwellers they believed could never rival formally educated scholars. The arrogance was staggering. These scholars placed their trust in a monastery established by outsiders rather than in oral histories preserved by people whose ancestors had lived in that region since the time of the events themselves. They elevated institutional authority above indigenous knowledge, assuming that written records produced 1,500 years later held more credibility than continuous living memory passed down from the beginning. But now, the radar is validating what the locals have maintained all along. The Bedouin were right. The academics were wrong. The mountain is real. The chambers are real. What was preserved through generations, ignored and dismissed for centuries, is now emerging as one of the most reliable records we have. Sometimes those closest to the land understand more than those studying it from afar. Sometimes oral tradition holds deeper truth than academic consensus. And sometimes, after 3,000 years, memory is finally proven right. So, where does that leave us? The data is here. The patterns are undeniable, and the mountain has finally begun to speak. Beneath Jabal al-Lawz lies something intentional, sealed, preserved, waiting. But the real question is not just what is down there. It's what happens if all of this is true. Because the moment those chambers are opened, history doesn't just expand, it breaks. Beliefs shift, maps are redrawn. Stories once dismissed as myth demand to be re-examined as memory. The radar has revealed the outline, not the full truth. And maybe that's by design. So, the real question isn't whether we should dig deeper. It's whether we're ready for what the truth might require once we do.